Welcome back to today's video. Today I'm going to go over a match played between Jan Nepomniachtchi and Hans Niemann in the Ooze, I forget the name of the tournament. I think it's Ooze something. But this game happened on June 14th. So yesterday, if you're watching this on June 15th, 2026. This game is important because you'll see why later on. But let me just preface this by saying both players are incredibly strong. You take away Hans's controversy, he's actually an incredibly great player. Not the best. That's just objective fact. Probably could be the best if he put in even more work than he already does, but highly unlikely. That's just me being realistic. Obviously, anybody who sees this, especially him, would probably hate me for saying that, but it's just the truth. There's still a bunch of great players out there. He's great. So is Jan. And you're going to see why this game ended up in a loss for Hans. That's not a spoiler. That's probably going to be the name of this video. Something like Jan crushes Hans, something like that. So let's get into it. The game starts with e4, e5, best by test as per Alpha Zero engines. Hans really likes playing this setup with e4, e5. Sometimes he'll play c5 and try to go for. I've noticed he likes a Knight over Sicilian in a lot of his online games that I've watched. Let me just show what the Knight over Sicilian looks like. Goes e4, c5, Knight f3, pawn to d6, d4, c takes, Knight takes. Then a bunch of different lines here, but we're going for the Knight Orf, the most aggressive line with the Sicilian. So you just put the Knight on f6, Knight to c3. He plays move pawn to a6. This is the Knight over Sicilian. Now modern engines have like to play this move, bishop to e3, then stacking your other bishop on e2. If that happens, I've gone over this in previous videos. If that happens, I just do this, kick out the knight. Then you get something like this. Not that. Short castle, long castle. And this is pretty good for both sides. White has a little bit of an advantage, but that's common in the Sicilian. But that's just a bit of a tangent. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. This is the Ruy Lopez, the Spanish game. Probably the most common opening in chess, next to the Italian probably, and maybe Queen's Gambit, just because the show was so popular. Bishop b5, a6. And here, actually, Hans doesn't usually play this move a6. In a lot of his games with the Ruy Lopez, he likes to play this move, knight to f6, basically, this is the Berlin defense. You guys are probably familiar with the Berlin draw, which is just when you play the Berlin defense, but you basically draw the game in a couple moves later. Just a way to get a quick draw if you don't want to play. You saw this a lot in the Candidates tournament. I think that Gukesh won a few years ago. I think Hikaru might have played it, and I want to say Vidit. Vidit plays it a lot, just to get the quick draw so you can get out of there earlier in classical. Anyways, Hans opts for this a6 move. This is the most common, one of the most common responses in the Ruy Lopez. The bishop will always fall back. Very rarely will you have a bishop take on c6. In fact, I don't think it's that good of a move if you take. You just play d takes. You have the open queen. Sure, you have doubled c pawns, but this is fine for counterplay. So anyway, a4. Sometimes in this a6, once the bishop falls back, people will play this move b5 immediately. I like doing it with the Ruy Lopez, but I don't play the Spanish enough to know super deep theory like you're going to see in this video. I like playing this move. I think Magnus plays this move a lot. This is a very common move. It's not a bad move. It's not some crazy objective good move. But here Hans plays knight to f6. And you see, look at both players' times. In this tournament, you get, I think it's 30 seconds per each move you make. So they're not spending too much time on these moves. Jan, short castles. I'm just going to switch back to Jan's point of view, just for more classical standard chess commentary. Bishop to e7, rook to e1, pawn to b5. Remember, I said this is super common in the Ruy Lopez and the Spanish. You just push this, This has all been played before. This is not game-breaking theory. You see the players are just blitzing out these moves. I think if you can see on this part of the screen, you see the move times, 0.1 second, 0.1 second, 5, 6, 3, 7, 6, 7. Haha. I'm such a chud. Bishop back to b3. Idea is simple. You don't want to get your bishop taken. And most of the times in the Ruy Lopez, after castles, White plays this move c3 to prep d4. And I think I said this in a previous video, but a couple years ago, like about a decade ago, this was super common. This is called the Marshall attack, where basically you prep this move c3 and Black responds immediately by playing d5, because when you play c3, you're saying you want to play d4. So Black just says, okay, I'm going to play this move pawn to d5 just to accelerate that and get a proper Marshall game. And then after this, you get something like this. And here there's many different lines. I think bishop b7 is mainline theory. I've always liked this move, knight back to f6. Computer doesn't like it because this is the line that I prefer to play. And then something like bishop f4 here. This is the ideal setup for white. You get your bishops out, you just have something like this. That's the Marshall in a nutshell. But here, Jan opts for this move a4. This is an anti-Marshall, basically because the Marshall is a very aggressive opening. It's very easy to just get confused, and it's very deep in theory. That's why it's not played as much anymore. And also, it can get pretty ugly. It's an ugly looking thing if you don't know what you're doing, or if both sides know what they're doing. Obviously, perfect chess is always a draw. So Jan plays move a4, an anti-Marshall. And here, Hans plays this move pawn to b4. Idea is simple. It doesn't want to take on a5, wants to sort of lock the center. Maybe play this move a5 in the future just to get a nice clamp on the queen side. Here, Jan plays this move d4. Instead of playing, you don't want to play c3 here. You play c3. You could play c3 here. I think it's not too bad of a move. Yeah, computer says it's fine. Brings back to just dead equal. But the idea of this is if you take, you're just going to play, instead of b takes, you can play b takes, but I think actually d takes is better here because you don't ruin this pawn structure too much, and you actually have a queen open that you can just move to somewhere like d3, slide the rook over, and get full control of this file. Anyways, Jan plays move d4. Hans plays d6. D takes. Knight takes. Knight takes e5. D takes e5. And you see, players still up on time. They have more time than they started with. And here, actually, you can trade with the queens if you're Jan, and Jan does in fact trade with the queens, giving Hans this open d file. But see, position's still a draw. And actually, you see this right now, and you're probably thinking, obviously, title spoils it, but you're thinking this just seems like a dead draw. You're just trading your pieces. You trade all your pieces, it's probably going to end up being a draw, but that's not entirely true in this game. And you'll see why. Jan plays this move knight to d2. Hans plays bishop to c5. And you see here, Hans spends a little bit of time. He spends about 5 minutes playing this move, and you're going to see why this is such a big deal. Here, knight to f3 from Hans, still up on time. Hans spends about 2 minutes, a little more than 2 minutes, playing the move knight to g4, bishop e3, bishop takes, pawn takes. Jan voluntarily damages his pawn structure because you can't take back with the rook, otherwise you'll just lose it to this. And also, I said this a lot of the time, you can play with an open f square. It's more difficult when you have these two pawns moved, your g and h pawns taken. You can get away with an h. This is probably better just trading your h pawn if you could. You get working mobility. You can get, there's less of a chance of you getting just like steamrolled here, especially now that there's fewer pieces on the board. But I'm gonna quit my yapping. Rook to d6. Here Hans spends a solid 26 minutes on this move. And in fact, I think this is the best move. Yeah, Engine says it's the best move. And this is I don't want to say ugly, I use that word a lot for these moves, but it's very unorthodox. especially in the mid game slash early end game. I always say queens off the board kind of enter end game territory. That's not a good rule of thumb, but that's what I always said. Uh, this just protects everything. It just opens up his rook more, gives him a ton of space. It can't be attacked really easily. You're probably gonna have to play something like this. But here, Jan plays this move. Very nice move. Bishop to d5. I think bishop to d5 is a really good move. At d simple, he's putting pressure on this rook, and this can't be taken because it's defended by this pawn. So he uses his bishop both as an attacker, and just to clamp down on these light squares. So this light squared bishop is going to be relatively useless. Sure, it can come here, but this knight's here. If the knight falls back and you play something like this, you're going to get a pawn to h3. And chances are this bishop's probably going to have to take. And ideally, you don't play it with where you can play something like this. Because you have two rooks, it's just going to be an ugly way to enter on the king side. So probably you want some. If bishop comes here, knight's probably not going to be here anymore. So you probably put your king there. King, not the best attacker, but it can be useful, especially in the endgame. Hans responds with the move c6, and just look at the time difference, a solid 39 minutes. Jan slides this bishop back. And something else to note, idea is simple. You don't have to take, you don't have to slide your rook over. Jan played this to clamp down, and this is something that you see a lot in chess, specifically with these Russian players. Jan Nepomniachtchi is a Russian player. But what happens is a lot of these Russian players, they do something from what they call the Russian school of chess, which I think Dina Belenkaya has a whole like course called the Russian school of chess, but I call Russian school of chess just the actual like Soviet era slash what they left for the legacy of the current Russian chess players. Obviously, there's not too much Russia kind of felt from that chess chess empire that they once held in the Soviet era. But anyways, they play this move called the invisible hand, which is fundamental to the Russian school of chess. You basically put a move here, you make a move, and they just slide your piece right back. And the idea is that you want to bait out a pawn. This pawn is going to be crucial in this game. But you basically play this you're going to waste tempo kind of, but you're going to argue that because you can move your piece back, but pawns can't move backwards, this piece is just stupid. It's not going to do anything. In fact, it's actually going to create a long-term weakness. They will purposely mess up the tempo of their own game just to try to get a better position. And that's very common in this Russian school of chess. You see these invisible hand moves very common. In fact, I like to, it isn't exactly a Russian school of chess thing, but in the Rory Lopez, when you go e4, e5, knight c3, knight f6, bishop b5, a6, I like to claim that's a Russian school of chess. It's not really because it's just common theory, but I say it's an invisible hand because you bait that a6 pawn. Obviously, it's not a bad move. It gives the enemy king mobility, but you can't push that h3 back to h2. You can't do it. So I call that invisible hand. It's not really invisible hand. This is more of an example of invisible hand. He plays this back to waste his tempo and push this pawn to c6. Anyways, here Hans plays this, after Jan slides back, Hans plays moves bishop to e6. Jan plays rook a to d1, trying to trade the rooks. Here, actually, what Jan does is he plays rook to d8 with his a rook, stacking this up, saying, I'm not going to give you control of that file. And here, neither sides are taking this yet. You don't have to take this. You don't have to rush it. I think computer says the best move. You see it's dead equal, this position, because this is just going to be a nice trade of pieces. Computer can draw this, but this c6 pawn is a long-term weakness because of this invisible hand. Forget what the computer says for now. This is very fundamental. Rook takes, bishop takes, pawn takes. Here, you see this very symmetrical position. Two doubled e pawns, no pawns on the f square, two pawns here. You have a knight here and here. Obviously, both of this knight you could argue is a little bit more active, but it's not really doing anything. You might have to probably reroute it eventually just to get some sort of attack on the a4 pawn. Then probably will end up going to a5 if you don't clamp this down. Two pawns. You can say these pawns are more active. I would say, okay, so what? But the position's just dead equal, 0-0. So after this move, f takes, Jan plays a really nice move, king to f1. The idea is, to be honest, this idea can't explain too much. It's just a nice move. Getting the king to the center. I don't think you would want to kick this out. I think you could. I think it's fine. Computer gives black a little bit of an advantage if they play this move and make the f6, which I guess just helps develop, but then you have something like this, and you get the sort of Petrov-ish system. But after this move, f takes e6, king f1, knight f6, and here Jan plays this move, king to e2, knight takes. Instead of taking back immediately, Jan just slides his rook over to try to trade rooks. Hans declines this trade. In fact, he puts his rook on d5, just saying, if you take, I'm going to fix my pawn structure. That's a very simple idea. And look at the time, though. Jan has over an hour. He's still has more time than he started with. This is just pure prep. This is 24 moves of deep prep. Whereas Hans is spending these hefty amounts of time just playing chess. Rook takes, pawn takes, knight takes, c5. King f3. You see, this king went to f1, e2, f3. It's trying to get into the game. Very nice king walk. King f8, knight c6. King e8, knight to b8. King d8. Knight takes a6, king c8. King f4, king b7. And now you're sitting here and you're wondering, now, how does white just have this massive advantage? Let's go back and look. Here, it's dead equal. King f8, good move by Hans. Knight to c6, good move by Jan. King e8, good move by Hans. Knight b8, king d8, knight takes a6, king c8. And you see, here is where Hans makes his mistake. He wasn't supposed to go king c8. He was supposed to go something like king d7. The idea is you want to get closer to where the action's happening right now. This is too much of a passive move. It's giving a tempo away by just going to c8. So by doing so, he loses tempo and he's further away from this fight. He probably wanted to go something like this and try to put pressure on his knight, which is exactly what happens. But here, Jan just says, take it, which Hans does. And in fact, Hans is up 2 points of material. But what Jan is saying is that, okay, well, now I'm going to take this pawn and I'm going to put pressure on this and put pressure on this. And in fact, you can check me. I'm just going to take this pawn. Knight to g4, pawn to e4. Knight takes h2, king takes b4, knight to g4, king c5. Idea simple, just wants to get a nice, really trivial pawn walk to promote. This knight's just it's active and inactive at the same time. It's not doing much, but it still can reroute, cover this e5 square. Very good. Here, Hans plays this move h5, king d4, king a5, giving up his a5, his a4 pawn. Not entirely. He pushes this, basically saying that if Hans wants to destroy my queenside pawns, you're going to have to go all the way to c file to do so. And even if you get there, chances are I'm going to have a king here preventing it. So here, Hans just wants to move knight to f6. Very big mistake. In fact, look at the engine bar. Still really high right now, but this just seals the deal, basically. pawn push, knight back to g8, e6, h4, king e4, knight e7, king f4, king b6, king g5, and you see here, Jan, very nice move. Hans puts the knight here, so Jan doesn't push this pawn, because if he pushes it, he just loses this. So instead, he takes this pawn, and the black king, Hans' king, takes on e6. Here, king to g5, king f7, king f5, knight a7, g4, g6 check, and e5. And here, Hans resigns because after you play something like king to e6, this king is just going to walk to f4. You can try to go to f6, but you're just going to play something like b4 and just walk all your pawns down, and this knight can only do so much. This is very important, just looking at the time. You go back to this time. Look at the time on this game. The game ended right here with Hans having 11 minutes and 54 seconds and Jan having, move this up, you can't really see too well, 1 hour and 22 minutes. And in fact, after this game, when Jan was being interviewed, he said to the reporters, post-game interview, whoever you want to call them, said that this was all prep against Magnus in his 2021 World Championship. And that's why he was just blitzing out these moves. He even said that he played this against Magnus, but Magnus knew how to do the draw. So they just made a quick draw. They didn't actually go this deep into the game. But just looking at this, you see why modern classical chess is very much not entirely dead, but at the highest level. It's just a game of memory. Jan remembered close to, not even close to, remember 51 moves of just pure theory. And this just all happened. And you remember that from 5 years ago. You just see the massive difference in these GMs, these super GMs. Obviously, like I said earlier in the video, Hans isn't a bad player, but he was just out-prepped. Jan literally busted out World Championship prep just to beat Hans. And you can make the argument like, okay, maybe Jan was scared. I don't think Jan was scared. Jan's a great player. He's a fantastic player. Maybe a little bit too, I don't say boring his game sometimes, but to be honest, I don't find myself studying a lot of his games. That's just my opinion. And you could disagree, that's fine. But I think he's a very talented player, and this just proves it in this game. So if you like this video, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and let me know which one to see in the next video. And also, if you're interested in a 0 to 2000 series with a brand new chess account, please let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.